Welcome everyone to season 3, episode 3 of In the Salmon Cricket Podcast. My name's Nuwan. Today I'll be hosting the show, and alongside I'll have the obviously the very wonderful Hasith. Who else would it be? We've been doing this for 3 seasons right now.
It's a little while.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Hasith. There's been some interesting developments in the cricket world of late, and I want to get stuck into this by discussing a tournament, a cricket tournament that probably deserves a bit more attention than it's been given in the cricket world of late, and that is the women's under-19 T20 World Cup, which recently concluded a couple of days ago. India came away as the champions, the Indian under-19 girls, and had a look at their tournament, coming into that World Cup, and these girls played a near flawless brand of cricket. Now, you're obviously a bit of an expert on women's cricket. You follow the game quite closely. You've got all your favorite players and stuff like that. I guess I just want to start. Let's be real. I didn't really see the Indian girls coming this far and winning it. I'm not trying to discredit their achievement, but I guess given where India is, compared to the other teams we've seen over the years, it's quite remarkable, and I guess it shows the depth of women's cricket in India. I guess I just want to ask you, what do you think India did right, or what changes occurred to see such a dominant Indian ladies team, take out the trophy?
Yeah, look, to be quite honest, I've not been following the under-19 women's for too long, but I think it's quite evident that I guess the caliber of players that came through this tournament were just worlds apart from other countries. You're in trouble when your opening batsman for the under-19 women's side also opens the batting for the full-size women's side. And has been for about a couple of years as well. I think she debuted in 16. I'm talking about, of course, Shafali Verma, who was the winning captain for the under-19 team for India. Absolute menace. So I'm surprised that you're surprised, Nuwan, considering Shafali Verma captain, and also Richard Ghosh. Richard Ghosh is also the wicketkeeper for the full size, how do you even call that full size? The all ages women, the seniors women's side, right? So yeah, look, I think I expected India to do quite well, and I definitely wasn't surprised that they won. They were very, very good, and it was really good to see players that weren't either Shafali or Rishabh perform really well. I think there was another opener who hit a couple of 90 not outs, and they really just pummeled the teams left, right, and center. I think the only upset for me was the game against Australia. They did quite poorly. They got bowled out for 87, which would have been a really interesting final had Australia made it with India. But alas, they weren't able to get it up on England.
I think I was just surprised with Australia, to be honest, because they had a pretty decent run as well, but they somehow just cooked that semi-final. I think your thoughts on the Australian under-19 women's team. Is this a worry for us going into the future? Are the likes of like Elise Perry and Ashley Gardner and all these like really outstanding women? Is that the end? Like, are there going to be any other new girls up and coming that could carry on this legacy of dominant Australian women's cricket? I mean, it was quite bizarre.
Yeah, look, I think honestly, just because they're Australian, I'm sure these girls will be up and ready to go in the next couple of years. And we certainly haven't seen the last of the likes of someone that's like Elise Perry, or Alyssa Healy, or all these beautiful players that have come in and just dominated the game. I think this one game against England was just an upset. I think an upset as in it's all right to lose, but I guess chasing 99 and getting bowled out for 96 in 18.4 overs, that is an upset. And it's just so unfortunate that upset came about in the semi-final. I think that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, you know me, I love my philosophical chats and sort of getting deeper into this sort of topic. Now, obviously, the Indian ladies, the under-19, they've won the under-19 World Cup. This is actually the first time that any Indian women's cricket team has won a global title, right? So this is the first time it's happened in Indian women's cricket. And we've seen over the years that when it comes to limited overs cricket, apart from Australia, the Indian ladies always seem to be that team that always challenges the Aussies. I remember the 2020 Women's World Cup finals between Australia and India.
Mm-hmm.
And India played a really good campaign up until the final. Could we see maybe in a couple of years? We already know how much the Indian men dominate, Indian cricket there. Could we see like a complete domination of Indian cricket in both the men's and women's format in the years to come, if this is how good the Indian under-19 team is right now?
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. And honestly, I kind of invited as well, because what a beautiful thing, the domination of Indian cricket, men's cricket, has done for the game as a whole. It's evolved so much, and it's a little bit like every other country is playing catch up to a degree in some regards, right? We saw the birth of the IPL and things like that just due to the dominance of Indian cricket. I would really like to see women's cricket get up as well. And why not, have that India-Australia rivalry transcend the sexes as well, and go across the women's. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
I think, and it sort of brings to another question. Why is it that you got India by far and away leading all the subcontinent teams when it comes to women's cricket? Why haven't the likes of Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh even, why are they at the same level? Do these girls just not care about cricket, or is it a cultural thing, lack of resources, funding? I don't know. Like it's so bizarre. Like Pakistan and India in the men's game are quite evenly matched, you'd say at times, right? But when it comes to the women's game, it's like chalk and cheese. Like I've seen the way the Pakistan women's team play, nowhere on the same level as the Indian women's, and they're just across the border. So, what's causing that, you reckon?
Yeah, no, that's a really tough question to ask. I think honestly, there's been a lot of progress with the acceptance of women's sport within India over the last probably 3 to 5 years, even probably going back even 10 years. You got the players like Mithali Raj and Joswami as well. These really senior, well-respected athletes that both male and female spectators of the sport in India really, really look up to. And I think it needs to be viewed by the likes of like Pakistani female cricketers, as well as Sri Lanka and Bangladesh as well. There needs to be some kind of like headline figure, like a role model, right, for the sport to be really taken seriously. And only then will a Pakistani, like I guess sort of like investor be like, all right, cool, we have like Pakistani version with Ali Raj here. We need to try and expose this player and show everyone how good she is. We need to show the world. And only then will, more people come to games and things like that. It is marketing to a degree, but it needs to happen. There needs to be a couple of females that stand up and just take the whole sport on, put the country on their back for a couple of years, and only then will you sprout that kind of, I guess, sort of acceptance. I think it's a cultural thing.
It's certainly cultural, because I was looking at the I was looking at the recent concluded Pakistan Women's Tour of Australia, and every game was completely one-sided. From the first ODI to right down to the last T20, like Pakistan were never in the hunt for any of these matches. So like there was one game where Australia scored 336 in their 50 overs, and Pakistan could only manage 235, right? And the other thing is they had a few wickets in their hand as well. So it's a bit weird. It's a bit sad that I guess the other countries just don't take it as full on as India.
It'll come. It'll come. These things take time. A lot of the times you see that one country has to sort of pave the way for other countries to come through. Let it be India. They've got the finances. They have. I dare say they love cricket more than any other country in the world in terms of sheer numbers, right?
There's no questioning that.
Yeah, everything's happening the way that it should, I feel.
Yeah, I guess with this under-19 World Cup, who are like the standout players for you when it came to India or any of these countries that participated? I think one good thing I want to talk about with this under-19 Women's World Cup is that it really provided like a platform for a lot of typically non-cricket nations to have a go. We saw the likes of Rwanda, Singapore, Indonesia was playing. We had a few African nations that were not typically part of the sort of global cricket setup within that tournament. So, I guess what I want to ask is is this tournament like a good sort of segue for cricket to become more global? Given that there's 16 teams in this tournament, that's quite a lot.
It is a lot, yeah. And I think the good thing, the good opportunity that the women have opposed from the men is because, and I guess whether it be a good or bad thing, I'll leave that up to the viewers. But
Mm.
because there is very minimal, I guess, sort of funding as a whole for this tournament,
Mm.
it allows for lesser known countries to actually come up because there's not a lot of funding required, right?
Yeah,
There's not a lot
yeah.
of there's not a lot of money being thrown around, and because of that, you can include countries like Rwanda
Mm.
and the UAE and things like that.
Mhm.
Countries that have a really hard time getting enough funding to play in the full size, say men's tournaments, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really good chance for the females to actually come together as a whole from like a sort of semi grassroots level, right? And sort
Mm.
of come up together, and they might be able to send the benchmark for other sports, or even for the men's. They can
Mm.
sort of show like the blueprints as to how to make this world game like truly a world game.
Yeah. I think so. Just a list of some of the random countries that were part of this World Cup. If I have a look at
Did
it
you say
now,
random countries?
well, not random, but like country.
What is a random country, Noah?
A random. Okay, you know what? Let's define that. Let's define that right here, right now.
Please, because I have
A
no idea.
random country in the cricketing
No,
vernacular.
no, in Nuwan's vernacular.
Ah, a
In your
random
vernacular.
country. Oh no, we're digging myself into a hole. A random country is simply a country one does not typically associate with uh with
One
cricket.
that Nuwan doesn't associate with cricket.
Okay, you know what? Let's. You know what? We don't need to. We don't need to. We don't do that here. Okay, this is. So some of these random countries that have played in the under-19 Women's T20 World Cup are
Mm,
Rwanda, number
mm,
one, interesting one there. We have the United States of America.
mhm.
Um, we had Indonesia. We had Scotland as well. Although Scotland have been around for a little while.
I was gonna say, is Scotland a
Um,
random like what does it take to be a non-random country to you, Nuwan?
you gotta at least you gotta be a country that I'm familiar with. That's how it works. Like I
Oh,
don't know. Yeah,
I
I know.
see.
I'm so biased. Everyone's like, "Nah, we'll never listen to this podcast again." But
Yeah.
but
You just lost all two Scottish viewers that we'll ever have just
true
now.
that, yeah. Out there in, is it Glasgow or is it Edinburgh? I don't know where Glasgow is.
You need to
I
stop.
don't,
You need to stop.
yeah, yeah,
I would say stop while you're ahead, but you're not even ahead, man.
yeah,
It's
not
you're too
even.
far gone.
Oh dear, but no, look, it's a good advertisement for cricket. I think how many teams participated? There was at least 16 teams. That's what I saw.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, and I hope the ICC look at this and use these kind of tournaments as a means to expand the game, make the game more popular around the world. But
Yeah.
look, we could women's cricket, we love it. We love to see it. We love to see it become successful. And congratulations to India, the Indian under-19s team, by far and away the best team. So all big congrats to them.
And happy birthday to Shafali Verma as well. I'm pretty sure she might have turned 20 maybe yesterday or the day before, like the day before the tournament final. So very good
Wow.
birthday present for her. Yeah.
She literally just made the age cutoff. But
Yeah, I know.
good one for her there. Good one for her. But look, moving on now. A bit more white ball cricket in today's, I guess, schedule. I want to talk about, I guess, we've spoken about this on and off, and it's a topic that we've spoken about, in depth. But I guess given where this format of the game is, it always raises a lot of debate, and that is the future of ODI cricket once again. I was listening to a podcast on Cricket Info actually, and it was titled "Bye Bye Bilaterals." So what that means, what they're talking about is like what happens, what's the future of a bilateral series? Like, are people tuning in to watch that now? What do we actually do about one-day international cricket? We earlier saw that Ben Stokes was retiring from one-day cricket, and now he's coming back into one-day cricket. England in particular, although they're dominating the T20 game and the Test game, in one-day cricket, it's been a little bit weird. They haven't won. I think they've lost their last 5 matches or something like that. Is that right, Hasith?
Yeah, they've lost the last 5 matches. Yes.
Exactly. So, both you and I personally love the one-day game. We grew up with the one-day game. That's all we ever really knew when we were kids. But again, I guess we come back to this topic. Like, what happens to this? What happens to this format of cricket? Like, are we only going to see it happen in the 50th World Cup now? It's like it's like that middle child, as you mentioned in a previous episode, that is always a bit neglected. You
Yeah.
know, and Ben Stokes coming back to play for England in one-day cricket after he was emphatic about, you know, not wanting to ever play ODIs again. Like, does this highlight the confusion that the cricket world feels about one-day cricket? If I may
I
put
don't
it so eloquently.
I don't know if it highlights the format itself, but what you just said reminded me of like the fact that like we have, I don't know if there's any other sport where players actually retire and then be like then try to like come back in or say they'll come back in. We had the likes of like AB de Villiers say, "Hey,
Yeah,
I'm happy to play in the World Cup," and he was still like really good at the time. I
yeah,
think there've been times where Faf du Plessis has been asked to come back because obviously he's been going on a tear in the Big Bash League down
yeah,
and under. I don't know what's happening with our cricketers, but don't retire early if you have any doubts. Like, you know
yeah,
what I mean? Take it all the way. Or if you want to retire, just stick to your guns because you're making things a little bit confusing for viewers and to selectors and stuff like that. And it's really hard to come back and decide whilst after you retired. You know, I mean, ask Dinesh Karthik that of all
yeah,
people, right? It's not. I mean, all credit to him. He's extremely fit
yeah,
bloke, fitter than
yeah.
half the Indian teams. I'm talking
Mm.
about you, Rishabh Pant. But you still have to back it up with the bat and the, you know what I mean. But I don't know. I think Ben Stokes is an interesting one because as everyone knows, ODIs is 50 overs. It's pretty much the sweet spot between Test and T20s. So
Yeah.
if you're going to play T20s and you're the captain of the Test side,
Mm.
one would hope and one would imagine that logic states that you very very capable of playing 50 over cricket. So why would you
Mm.
not do that?
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure. I'm scratching my head.
But you know, it I guess it, like in that episode, they just raised some really good points about one-day cricket as a format, as an entity of its own, because you know, obviously during the Kerry Packer era, one-day cricket was really popular because it was new, it was novel. People were like, "What is this?" They called it pajama cricket. You know, seeing cricket
So
players
good.
wear colored clothes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But obviously, people got used to it, and now it's just, you know, it's just always competing with T20, and T20 is winning. Let's be real, like that
Yeah.
T20 is blowing away ODI cricket. And we do have the 50 over World Cup coming up in India, but you know, honestly, like I don't know, I can't gauge what the viewership will be like. Um,
It's going to be huge, Nuwan. I'm telling you right now. You heard it here. It's in
yeah,
India. It's going to be massive. Of course it is.
it will be massive. It will be massive, but it's like the one-day game as an entity in its own. It's you know, it's declining. I don't know. It
No,
really
I know what you're
it
saying.
really
I'm only saying it's going to be massive because it is in India. If it was, say, somewhere else,
that's the
I'll
thing,
be more inclined to agree with you. Yeah.
right?
This World Cup is going to be big.
It will be, and you know, we obviously expect India to go really well. And if they don't win the World Cup, then you know, gosh, I hope someone's house is remains standing.
Yeah,
But,
definitely double up on security, home security for
yeah,
the Indian cricket team, huh?
um, but like it's just an interesting one because they're like, because if you were to market one-day cricket, right, you don't know where to start. Like one-day cricket was easy to advertise back in the days when it was popular and new and novel because it was just so different to tests. But now you've got like this shorter format that's literally just, it's like outstripping, outcompeting one-day cricket by a long shot.
Yeah, it's not even close.
And so like as a, you know, as you and I as purists of the game that love that ODI game, like how do we make this format of the game prominent? You know, is it about having more meaningful series? Is it about having tri-series instead of bilaterals, um, to create a bit of competitiveness? Because I think for us growing up, right, one reason why one-day cricket was so attractive to us and so exciting is because it was always played in the tri-series. You know, it was like, remember that, you know, that
Yeah.
VB series, Australia, South Africa, Sri Lanka, or it was like Australia, and Pakistan, right?
Mm.
And when
Australia, India, Sri Lanka.
mm, I remember that, yeah.
So good.
And so is that how we make ODI cricket rejuvenate it or make it popular again? I don't know. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I just want to touch on what you said previously, you brought up the fact that ODI was massive or it got like a lot of traction because it was new. I think that's
Mm,
pretty much what happened with the T20 series and what
mm,
happened for a little bit with the test format previously is
mm,
happening to the ODI or did happen to the ODI format,
yeah.
right? The only
Mm,
thing is, however, when ODIs came after test, it became the second format.
mm,
Now that
mm,
it's now there's test ODI and T20,
yeah.
you know, everyone's sort of span to like concentrate on formats and things like that. It's not going to be as big. So the two obvious ones, because there's such a big difference between them, is T20s and Test cricket, right? So touching on what you said about the bilateral or the tri series, that's one of the best things about ODI cricket as a whole. It's such a beautiful thing because you and I, we're both from Melbourne, Australia. It's so unfortunate that I can't go to the MCG and watch Sri Lanka play another team other than Australia. It doesn't make any kind of sense to me. And like I can only do that if it's like a world tournament or something like that. And the atmosphere for a World Cup, although it is good, it's not the same as a tri series or something. Because sometimes you want to go and you don't want to be like hunched up against like a bajillion people. You want to kind of just relax and just watch the cricket and just, have a couple of beers. Don't have to line up for hours for food and things like that, or a beer or what have you. The tri series was absolutely incredible, and I completely agree with you. If they want to rejuvenate cricket, meaningful cricket, what does that mean? I'm not sure what that means, but tri series bring that joint back in a big way.
By meaningful, I guess it's like knowing that every match means something towards getting that trophy. You know what I mean? Like I remember as a kid, like every Sri Lanka game I would watch with so much interest because I do the maths and the calculations.
The net run rate, the Nuwan's net run rate, the NNRR.
I've been trying to figure out, okay, if Sri Lanka beats South Africa today, if they lose Australia by this much, they'll get to the final, and then like then you have to watch it. You feel compelled to watch it. There's no need to convince me. I'm already there.
I agree.
And I think what made ODI cricket really beautiful back in the day when we were growing up is just the ebb and the flow. Like you could be like 5 for 60, struggling in the middle overs, and you have this massive partnership that brings it back, and then suddenly, the last 10, 8 overs, you have a massive burst, and now you've scored 280, 290. It turns out to be an absolute a thriller, But then I guess that also depends on the quality of the teams as well. So, to me, the 2000s is like a bit of a golden age in ODI cricket because, Sri Lanka was up there as a very competitive team. You have the likes of India, Pakistan, all these countries that played.
Africa, pretty much, it was like a peak for a lot of countries. So I'm not sure what's happened in the last probably 15 years or so. But I guess you and I, we're also looking at that time period through rose-colored glasses. Right? You know what I mean? Like we really loved it because we had the likes of like Jai Surya, Adapadu, Ricky Ponting, Glenn McGrath, Brett Lee, Callis. I could go on.
Peterson even. Peterson was good.
Oh man, which one? There's a couple.
Kevin Peterson, big
KP. Yeah, but it was
it was a good time. It was a good time for cricket, a very wholesome time when like people just played because they wanted to win. Instead of big cash, but it's certainly a topic we'll sort of extrapolate and indulge in once we see how the next ODI series pans out and how the World Cup pans out as well. I think to wrap things up as we come to the end of another episode is I want to talk about a special player, and we may be a little bit late in discussing his phenomenal career, and that is none other than the now retired South African cricket maestro, legend, champion, none other than the great Hashim Amla. Hashim Amla said goodbye to international the 18th of January, I think. So just a couple of weeks ago, retiring from all formats of the game. In my opinion, he's one of those all-time legendary players who doesn't get enough of a mention. A bit of a Shivnarine Chanderpaul, bit of a Sangakkara in essence, although Sangakkara really, I don't know, hang on. Although Sangakkara definitely, took the spotlight towards the latter part of his career, and he's now obviously he's highly regarded wherever he goes. But Hashim Amla has always been a player that has always had phenomenal achievements, but he's just never deserved the spotlight that he's owed. Your thoughts on Hashim Amla as a player, a cricketer, a human being? He's certainly one of the most elegant players that I've ever seen come out of South Africa.
Yeah, I think Hashim Amla is a special human. I know a couple of South African greats had a lot of really, really good things to say about him. I think he's just such a great servant to the sport of cricket. He wore his heart on his sleeve every time he went out to bat. he just played and played and played in accordance to what was required of him
Mm.
as a person, as a member of the South African team. I don't think a single person can say anything bad about Hashim Amla. He played a flawless career.
Yeah.
So
Oh, dude,
hats off.
100%. 100%. I think an innings that comes to my mind when I remember Hashim Amla is in the Test arena, and this was an incredible 196 that he scored at the Wacker, mind you. Okay, at Perth, a bouncy track against the likes of Mitchell Johnson, right, and Stark, and all these like brilliant Australian fast bowlers in their prime, like peak prime. Like this is Johnson bowling absolute like thunderbolts, and
Johnson the Wacker, don't even talk to me, man.
yeah, and
That's
if you watch
that's
the
nightmares.
highlights of that innings, the way Hamler played Johnson,
Yeah.
you'd be like, how is this even possible? Like just wristy flicks, just casually, just like
He's a
hitting,
wizard.
yeah, just casually just whacking Johnson for like fours with ease, no fear. I mean, he might play and miss one, but it doesn't concern
No.
him. You know,
He's the chess master of cricket, if you can make
yeah,
that kind of like, you know what I
yeah.
mean? Yeah. He
I think
doesn't
I
get
think one
bogged
of
down by anything.
No, not at all. I think one of Umla's key strengths as a batsman, this is something that Mark Taylor mentions, that he's extremely good with his wrists. Like he plays like a real subcontinent player. Like the way he would just maneuver the ball
Yeah.
any part of the ground, it made him a real asset in the one-day game
Yes.
because he was always the guy that's getting off strike, getting off strike, getting off strike, you know? And before you know it, he's made like 50 off like 45 balls and there's only been one boundary. But like he's
Yeah.
hit so many doubles and twos and stuff like that.
He's so good. I think his strength is you're mentioning wrists. If anybody, obviously go watch his highlights if you don't know who we're talking about. But if you don't know who we're talking about, you probably haven't been watching cricket for a long time.
Yeah.
Hashim Amla, when he strikes the ball, he's a player that has probably one of the limpest wrists that I've seen from
Yeah.
a batsman, and
Yeah.
it's so strange. When he comes down to play the stroke, when he meets the ball with his bat, it's almost like cracking a whip. But
Yeah.
then like the whip is his wrist. So he'll play a cover drive, he'll play a cut shot, he'll come down and he'll just like snap it.
Yeah.
And it's that itself is an art. It's really hard to get timing correct, but to time the whip of your wrist, like
yeah, it's a special skill. I think Amla's in that same league as like the Jawardners, the Sangakaras, the Dravids. They're all touch players, exactly right. They're they're just all about touch and timing, and that's what makes them so graceful and elegant to watch. You know.
yeah.
And I think the reason, in essence, why Amla doesn't necessarily get the limelight or spotlight he deserves is because he's a bloke who purely lets his bat do the talking. You know, I don't think I've ever seen Amla do a lot of interviews. I've never seen Amla just be that bloke who's on a TV show just chatting. Like he's just he scores a massive ton and then leaves. You know, like he's like,
a
okay, I've done my
silent
job.
assassin.
Yeah, and he's one of those players that you have to kind of like outwardly mention or you forget about how good of a player he is. I mean, have a look at some of these stats. Like I sometimes not forget, but you sometimes just don't take the time to really appreciate how much of a phenomenal player he is. Averaging 46 in Test cricket with a highest score of 311, not out. ODI batting average of 49.46. And remember, he played in an era where having an average like that was quite unheard of.
Yeah.
28 Test hundreds, 27 ODI hundreds. I don't know. These are just mouthwatering numbers. Almost 18,000 international runs in total. I mean, and he played T20s for a while as well. He was pretty decent at that as well.
Yeah.
Average 33 in T20 international cricket at a striker of 132, which given where he was when T20 first started, that is actually quite good. 850 is the highest score of 97 not out. Like I don't know, he's a bloke that deserves a lot more credit than he was due. But the interesting thing about Amla is that when you mention his name within South African cricket circles, they just have so much praise for him. Like it's really nice to see.
Yeah, I'm just having a look now. He's also like he's such a he just goes about his business in such a like sort of nonchalant way.
Yeah,
and I think it's very like it's definitely on purpose. Like that's the sort of vibe that he wants to like emanate when he goes out and plays on and off the field.
Yeah.
but like you said, he kind of just like flies under the radar. Like he's, I'm not sure if these records are still. I'm pretty sure they're still accurate, but I'm fairly sure he's like the fastest to like. He's cracked a lot of records. If I have a look now, I'm pretty sure he's the fastest to 4, 5, 6, and 7,000 runs in ODI
Yeah, yeah,
cricket.
yeah.
And he's
I
obviously
saw
quicker
that
than the
too,
likes of
actually.
Virat
I saw
Kohli
that
and
too
stuff.
on, yeah, I saw that too on Instagram. Something about him like taking the least number of innings to reach 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 runs. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
And he's the second fastest to 8,000. So I think that's when Virat Kohli went through his like crazy peak. I dare say it's probably like after 2013, like 2013 and after, when Kohli just went on a tear.
yeah.
But Hashim Amla, like, it's really like, I think it's like a beautifully unfortunate thing that he doesn't get the amount of credit that you and I know and everyone else knows he deserves. But I
Yeah.
think that's exactly what he wants. He wants to just
Oh yeah.
he wants to come into the world of cricket, absolutely destroy, and
Yeah.
then just leave as just like this silent prince just into the night. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's it.
Just
That's
go
just
off
like it's like
without a trace.
100%. You kind of look around bewildered, and you're like, wait, what was that? Who was that? What?
Who's that?
Shit.
Is that the myth, the legend,
Who,
Hashim
who,
Amla?
who was that guy that scored 250 plus? What was his name
Yeah,
again? Yeah,
crazy
you
man.
know. I put Shivnarine Chanderpaul in that category as well. I mean, how good
Yeah,
is Chanderpaul? You
that's
know,
a very good comparison. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, definitely.
um,
Chanderpaul is a very similar situation to
I feel like
Amla.
it's
Yeah.
always like the blokes that are always called on to do like a bit of a rescue job. It's always the blokes that have to like take their team out of a hole that
They
I
do the
like
hard work. Eh?
are least remembered, which is so unfair because they're like the actual heroes.
Yeah,
Um, and then it's and the blokes that score these like glamorous hundreds with like zero pressure, they're the ones that
yeah.
are seen as like, oh, the greats of all time.
Exactly. What you just
Um,
said now reminds me of like Michael Bevan and what he used to do
yeah, okay,
coming down like
yeah.
6 or 7. Do you know what I mean? He did all the dirty
Mm.
work and he got Australia out of so many pickles, but
Oh,
he doesn't
dude,
get the same recognition that Mark Ward does,
no,
right?
no, exactly. Yeah, okay.
Right?
You raise a good point there. I can see where you're going with that. Yeah,
Mm,
actually, and you know what's funny? Michael Bevan averaged like 50 in ODI cricket as well.
yeah,
That's crazy,
yeah.
especially during the 90s. In the 90s, like that's
He
like
was just hard to
averaging
get
like
out. You know what I mean? He came down the order. He was hard to get out. He just got it done. That's the thing.
averaging. He had a batting average of 50, and he was an ODI player from the 90s, which is unheard of. Like that's
Yeah,
like averaging, I don't know,
like
like
65 or something.
yeah, in like tests consistently. So
Uh,
it's a brilliant comparison you made there. But look, on that note, we've come to the end of another episode. This is obviously our first episode that's been live streamed. We would have liked a few more people listening in, but I guess we'll work on that. We'll work on that. We'll work on that. I mean, this will obviously be recorded and edited, and we'll check this up on Spotify. But look, we're learning all the time here in the Salmon, and if we'll see you all again for the next episode, and it's goodbye for now.
See you guys. Have a good week.